men never stop loving women. They only stop losing themselves in the name of love. And that is the starting point of an awakening unlike anything seen in modern history. Today, a sociologist announced that 62% of men under 35 are intentionally choosing to stay single. The world becomes confused, not because men are afraid of love, not because they are weak or avoiding responsibility, but because they are prioritizing one thing above everything else their inner peace. If modern women pursue self-love as a slogan of the era, then men pursue self-peace as a survival instinct. One side wants to love themselves more, the other simply wants to live in quietness without being judged, without being required to constantly prove their worth. And the most striking part is, they are happier than ever. They no longer have to chase half-hearted conversations, emotionally draining relationships, or invisible expectations weighing on their shoulders. They wake up in the morning without having to explain why they were silent. They go to bed at night without apologizing for things they never did. Modern men are beginning to realize a truth that has been hidden for a very long time. Peace is sometimes more valuable than love. So what happened? Why is an entire generation of men choosing to be alone not out of desperation, but out of freedom? Why are they finding happiness in the very space others call loneliness? And the biggest, most important, most painful question, is it possible that men didn't change at all, but the world has forced them to treat their own hearts in an entirely new way? In today's world, men aren't just tired because of responsibility. They're tired because they're expected to speak an emotional language they were never taught. Men think in logic, women feel through emotion, and the gap between these two languages grows wider and wider. A simple statement from a man can be interpreted as coldness, and a moment of silence can be seen as distance. When men use logic to solve problems, women want to be heard and empathized with. When women seek connection, men seek solutions. And in this mismatch of rhythms, men begin to feel exhausted. But the fatigue doesn't come only from gender differences. It comes from a dating market that is overloaded, a world where options are no longer balanced. Women are pursued more than ever, while men are pushed into an invisible competition where they must prove their worth every minute, every hour. While social media inflates the image of the perfect man, men feel like they cannot be wrong, cannot be weak, cannot fail. Every opening text, every date, every moment of meeting expectations feels like a test whose score they will never see. Then the question emerges, why did men stop pursuing? The answer is not because they no longer want love, but because they don't want to be judged in the process of loving. A recent survey shows that 74% of men feel modern relationships feel more like work than love, where they must constantly please, constantly prove, and constantly maintain an image. No comfort, no natural flow, no softness like before. They begin to shift from I must prove my value to be chosen to, I must protect my peace before offering it to anyone. This is not a weakness, this is clarity. When men realize that peace is harder to find than love, they begin to prioritize what keeps them true to themselves. And this quiet shift opens a new door leading to a phenomenon never seen before, a reversal of power in dating. Because when men stop chasing, everything begins to move. When men stop chasing, something interesting happens, the energy reverses. In modern psychology, this is called the law of non-chasing, the rule of non-pursuit. When a man stops running after affection, he begins redirecting that energy back into himself, his body, his career, his finances, his mindset, his mental health. And the paradox, yet the absolute truth, is that the very moment he withdraws his energy from pursuing someone else, his attractiveness multiplies, not because he is trying to appear mysterious, but because he genuinely has a growing world of his own. The shift becomes strikingly clear from begging for attention. He becomes the one with standards, from wanting to be loved. He becomes the one who can reject, from fearing losing someone. He becomes the one others fear losing. And in that silence, women begin to react differently. Instead of asking, "Is he my type?" they begin asking, "Am I his type? Does he like me? Why isn't he chasing me like other men do?" Those questions are the first signs of a power reversal. When a man's attention is no longer easy to obtain, it becomes an asset. When his time becomes expensive, it becomes a standard. A behavioral study shows that men who prioritize their own lives, stable careers, strong physical health, intentional finances are often perceived as more attractive than their actual age by about 3-5 years. They look younger in women's eyes, yet radiate a more mature energy. So what makes the detached but purposeful type of man unattached to chasing yet living with intention so compelling? Because calmness is the rarest form of masculinity in a chaotic era, and self-mastery is something that cannot be faked. It is the combination of just enough distance and strong inner grounding that turns men into a new form of masculinity, silent but powerful, distant but not cold, serene but gravitational. That kind of presence makes women sense clearly that they are no longer in the position of being chosen by default, but standing before a man who can walk away at any moment if that is what it takes to protect his peace. And that very moment of shifting power leads us into the darker side of the story where men begin to realize the true cost of love in this era. Divorce is never just a breakup for men. It feels like an awakening slap that hits their entire life, collapsing everything that once served as their foundation, not only losing a wife, but losing their familiar rhythm of living, losing time with their children, losing the assets they worked for, losing the home they once called family. Many say men are strong during divorce, but the truth is they only endure in silence, and within that silence, they lose far more than anyone can see. The landscape of marriage reveals a cold reality. 78% of divorces are initiated by women. A statistic not meant to assign blame, but to understand that the balance of power in marriage has completely shifted. When a marriage falls apart, men are often the ones carrying most financial obligations, while their time with their children is significantly reduced. They become weekend fathers, their role limited even though their hearts remain full of love. Though they do not speak it, that pain quietly eats away at their self-worth, leaving many men directionless, demotivated, and doubtful of anything called lifelong love. The legal system designed to protect often makes men feel as though they are being punished for believing in marriage. They realize that a single signature can turn them from a pillar of the family into an outsider. A space that was once home suddenly becomes a memory. Time that once belonged to them becomes something they must request permission to share. This sense of injustice pushes many men into an awakening more powerful than any warning. From the collapse, they begin to rebuild. From the pain, they rediscover peace. And from that peace, they realize they never want to return to an emotional prison simply because society says that having a family is the definition of success. From this, a quiet movement rises, men going peaceful, not their own way. It is not an anti-women movement, but a journey where men choose calm over chaos, autonomy over dependency, peace over emotional battles with no end. They understand that collapse is not a full stop, but a comma that opens a new chapter, a chapter of freedom and reconstruction, and it is that reconstruction that leads them to a deeper question: if marriage can take so much away, then where does the true meaning of a man's life actually lie? That question opens the next phase, the phase of an existential crisis quietly burning inside millions of modern men. A generation of men is entering a silent yet deepest crisis ever experienced, a crisis of meaning. They are gradually losing faith in the systems that were once considered the pillars of a man's life. Marriage no longer guarantees happiness. Religion is no longer a stable spiritual anchor, and traditional careers no longer provide the sense of safety or pride they once did. As these values shake, men fall into a void that no one ever prepared them to navigate. Who calls this the lonely men epidemic, the epidemic of male loneliness? But what's remarkable is that men are not sinking into despair. They turn loneliness into motivation. They turn emptiness into inner strength. They no longer try to run away from silence. They learn to live with it, even find freedom within it. Because there is a profound difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the feeling of being disconnected. Solitude is the choice to step away from the noise to rediscover one's true essence. Loneliness weakens men. Solitude strengthens them. And through this choice, men begin to reflect on the journey of their lives, stage by stage. In their 20s, they feel lost, torn between family expectations, pressure to succeed, and a blurry sense of self. In their 30s, they begin building foundations, career, health, finances, emotional stability. In their 40s, they look at life with awakened observation, no longer impatient, no longer angry, but full of understanding of the world and of themselves. At every stage, They realize that meaning doesn't come from being loved, but from knowing what they are living for. And that is why a certain saying becomes increasingly true: a man without meaning becomes dangerous to himself or to the system. When a man loses purpose, he is easily swallowed by the chaos of modern life. But when he reclaims meaning through discipline, self-mastery, and inner peace, he becomes the most stable and powerful version of himself. And this awakening leads him to a new choice. If the world no longer provides ready-made meaning, he will create his own. This becomes the starting point for the rise of an entirely new lifestyle, a kind of singlehood not born from fear of love, but from choosing freedom and intentional living. Being single is no longer a symbol of failure or loneliness as society once labelled it. It has become an intentional choice, a lifestyle built on discipline and self-respect. Men are not single to escape love. They are single so they don't have to escape from themselves. They understand that love only matters when it does not cost them their inner peace. And when they choose to step out of heavy, draining relationships, they are choosing the most correct form of self-love through self-mastery, discipline, and maturity. Data from 2025 reveals something surprising: optimized single men have better health, more stable finances, and higher overall happiness compared to many groups of married men. Not because they dislike marriage, but because they intentionally design their lives in ways that align with their true nature. In intentional singlehood, there are 3 solid pillars modern men build upon: financial autonomy, freedom of time, and emotional regulation. When they are no longer bound by constant emotional demands, they have far more energy to focus on goals, career, and health. Their attractiveness comes from disciplined, strict diet, consistent workouts, reading, learning new skills, building their own projects, long-term investing. These are the things that create a firm presence and a quietly compelling energy without needing to show off. That discipline makes it unnecessary for them to use love to define themselves. They don't need anyone to validate their worth. They don't need to chase approval. And because of that, they become the hardest men to manipulate. They don't cling, they don't fear loss, and they don't depend on someone else's permission to feel enough. Here, there is a major difference between being alone and building alone. Being alone is simply existing in isolation. Building alone is the process of constructing oneself in silence. One is emptiness, the other is foundation. One weakens. The other makes men stronger every single day. And once men understand that difference, they enter a new stage of life, a stage where freedom is no longer an escape, but the foundation of a deeper, calmer, more enduring form of strength. But this journey does not end here. Because the more men build themselves, the more they realize an even more important truth: their strength does not lie in distancing themselves from love, but in redefining it in a way that can no longer hurt them. The truth has never changed: men do not abandon love. They only abandon the suffering that comes with relationships that drain them. Love does not die. It is simply distorted by expectations, emotional pressure, and invisible battles men are forced to carry. And at a certain point, they realize they are no longer willing to trade their peace for a love filled with chaos. That is when a new form of masculinity rises: calm masculinity. Not coldness, not dominance, but calm, quiet, intentional, grounded. A masculinity that doesn't need to prove itself, doesn't need to posture, doesn't need to defeat anyone, only the chaos within. When men enter this state, they no longer want relationships that shake their world. They want relationships that add peace, not take it away. A woman enters their life not to fill a void, but to harmonize with the silence they worked so hard to build. Love is no longer a chase, but a resonance. No longer unconditional sacrifice, but measured giving. No longer a place where they lose themselves, but a place where they can remain themselves. And at this stage of life, men begin to redefine something society taught them since childhood: legacy. Legacy used to mean family, children, lineage. But modern men understand that legacy is not only born, it is built. Legacy can be a business built from nothing, an idea that changes their life, a value passed on to others, a mark that the world remembers, even for a moment. Legacy is no longer just what they leave for their children, but what they leave for life itself. And this realization clarifies a powerful truth: men do not stop loving. They simply begin to love more wisely in a way that does not betray themselves. does not wound their spirit, and does not force them to sacrifice their peace for someone's presence. Because for them, peace, love, if love, demands that they abandon themselves. And the moment they understand this, a new door opens the door to true freedom, where men can finally face the question society keeps avoiding. If loving wisely is a form of saving themselves, then what is the real future of men in this world? There is a moment every mature man has experienced, the moment he realizes that love is not a battlefield where he must prove endurance. It is the moment he understands he was not born to fix someone, save someone, or sacrifice his peace to maintain something that is no longer meant for him. And then, a new mindset emerges sharper, calmer, clearer. Love does not die. Men simply refuse the chaos. This is the shift into calm masculinity, masculinity that does not explode emotionally, does not beg for validation, but stands firm in silence and purpose. This type of man is not swept into meaningless emotional storms, and does not chase things that drain his energy. He chooses relationships that make life lighter, not heavier, that add peace, not remove it. With maturity, men also redefine their legacy. It is not only family or titles. Legacy is the idea he leaves behind, the career he builds, the value he gives the world, even the autonomy and dignity he protects until the end. And then he realizes a truth that seems cold, but is actually liberating. Men do not stop loving. They simply begin to love wisely. They do not sacrifice themselves to keep someone. Peace. Love if love requires him to betray who he is. And this shift leads directly into the next part, when men stop placing women at the center of their lives and place themselves at the root instead. They unintentionally trigger an entirely different kind of attraction, the attraction born from emotional independence.